Good morning, everyone, and thanks for being here. It's nice to see you all again. And this is the fourth webinar in our learning series. And some of us were saying it's becoming a nice routine for Thursdays. So really nice to see you, and happy Thanksgiving to anyone who's joining us from the US or anyone who's celebrating that today. We're so glad that you're here with us. I just want to start like we have been with a few reminders and some tech setup. We're very happy to be able to offer this webinar in both French and English, as well as ASL interpretation, LSQ, closed captioning, and plain language. To hear the webinar in French, we ask that you choose the language from the bottom of your screen. You'll see a little globe icon that will have the options of French or English. If you'd like to hear the webinar in French, please choose the French option. To hear in English, please choose English. We will have presenters in both French and English, and you do not need to change these settings once you choose the language that you would like to hear in. For those of you who are using a screen reader, we understand that there's not a shortcut key for this yet, but if you press tab enough times, it gets to the language options. We also recommend that you watch the video, the webinar today, in speaker view rather than gallery view. When you watch in speaker view, you will see both the ASL and LSQ interpreters. If you watch in gallery view, you'll see a lot of small screens, so lots of smiling faces, but you won't be able to see the speaker and focus in quite as much. And lastly, we understand that the chat box sometimes pops up and can be distracting. There is an option under the accessibility menu to turn the chat box off. It's called public meeting chat received. You can tick that box or untick it in order to receive that. So at this point, I'll just remind you, please choose your language. We suggest watching in speaker view and check your accessibility options. So again, I just want to thank you for being here, and we're so glad to have Jonathan Marchand and Rabia Kader as our co-hosts today. They'll be joining us in just a minute. But before we move to that, I just want to acknowledge that we're joining you. I'm joining you from the West Coast today, and we just respectfully acknowledge that the work of Plan and where we're hosting today is on the Coast Salish ancestral traditional unceded territories of the Squamish, Stolo, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. People are joining from all over the country, and if you'd like, you can put in the chat box where you're joining from, but we just want to say that we're grateful to be here and to be able to have you join us today. So at this point, before we welcome Jonathan to give us a bit of an introduction and a context for being here, we're so glad to have our friend Christine Main with us today. And Christine is going to share with us one of her poems that I think is very suitable for what we're talking about today. So Christine and Marianne, thank you for being here, and I'll just turn it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. This is Christine, and I am Marianne. I am her caregiver for today. And Christine is happy to share with you all one of her best poems she made like recently. So this is about politics. Politics are like movies, mostly unbelievable. Protagonists in suits and ties follow scripts they neither understand nor believe in. Where is the director when you need him? He needs to shout, cut, and do it again. This time with feeling. You're not psychopath, for God's sake. Try a little more humanity. Let your hair down. Be real. Go for honesty. Break the mold this time.
Thank you. Thank you, Christine, for sharing that poem. And as we send out the resources at the end, for those of you who want to read the poem again, we'll be sure to send that out to you. But thank you, Christine, for being here, and Marianne for reading the poem for us.
Our pleasure.
Thank you. And now, Jonathan, I want to welcome you back and just say thank you for being the co-host today. And we'd like to hear from you. So over to you, Jonathan.
Merci beaucoup, Rebecca. Donc, bienvenue tout le monde. Aujourd'hui, on est ici pour discuter de l'importance de travailler ensemble, hein, non seulement avec nos collègues, mais de bâtir un mouvement, même d'inclure des gens, des fois qu'on n'est pas tous d'accord. Donc, je vais vous parler un peu de mon expérience dans ce sens-là. Je vais faire une petite présentation de mon travail des dernières années. Donc, ça ressemble à ça. Donc, qui je suis? Moi, j'ai 44 ans. Je suis un activiste. Je suis un défenseur des droits des personnes handicapées. Je suis un ingénieur réseau senior en informatique. J'ai travaillé longtemps au Québec, en Australie aussi. Je suis institutionnalisé depuis 2010 parce qu'il n'y a pas assez de soutien pour vivre dans la communauté au Québec. Moi, j'ai besoin d'assistance 24 heures sur 24. C'est un service qui n'existe pas actuellement au Québec. Je me bats depuis 2010 pour faire avancer cette cause-là, pour vivre dans la communauté. Je suis aussi un porte-parole d'un organisme qui s'appelle Every Canadian Counts et je suis cofondateur, l'initiateur d'un projet qui s'appelle Coop Assist, qui est la coopérative québécoise pour la vie autonome. Donc, pour donner un peu de contexte, comment ça fonctionne au Québec puis au Canada, hein, c'est la même problématique qu'on a d'une côte à l'autre dans tout le pays. Pendant la pandémie, M. Legault, premier ministre du Québec, a bien illustré comment ça fonctionne au pays. Il y a vraiment deux mondes au Canada. Il y a le monde des personnes handicapées et des personnes âgées. Et il y a le monde des citoyens normaux, qu'on peut dire. Souvent, les personnes handicapées, les personnes âgées qui ont besoin d'assistance dans leur quotidien, dans vie, dans des CHSLD qu'on appelle au Québec. C'est des centres d'hébergement de longue durée. Donc, on est ségrégué du reste de la population. On vit dans un autre monde. On est, comme je disais, les vrais citoyens vivent dans la communauté. Et il y a environ 70% des personnes qui ont un handicap sévère au Québec qui vivent dans des institutions ségrégées du reste de la société. Et bon, quand tu atterris en institution, c'est extrêmement difficile de sortir de là. Souvent, c'est la destination finale pour plusieurs. Et bon, on l'a vu avec les orientations du gouvernement fédéral actuel, l'euthanasie est souvent proposée comme solution. Donc, je suis entreposé dans une institution depuis environ 10 ans. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire de vivre dans une institution? Bon, rapidement, ce que ça veut dire, c'est que vous n'avez pas de choix ou contrôle sur où tu vis ou comment tu vis. Donc, tu n'as aucun choix dans ta vie personnelle. Tu n'as aucun choix sur qui touche ton corps pour te fournir de l'assistance. Ça, c'est extrêmement dégradant. Tu n'as pas le droit à une vie familiale normale et tu ne peux pas investir dans ton futur. Donc, travailler, c'est extrêmement difficile avec les conditions socio-économiques à l'intérieur d'une institution. Et tu n'as pas de spontanéité, de flexibilité dans ta vie. Et bon, il y a un dossier qui est gardé sur toi en tout temps. Tes moindres gestes, tes moindres paroles peuvent être catalogués dans un dossier. Et bon, c'est des environnements qui sont violents à tous les niveaux, que ce soit il y a de la violence entre les résidents, entre les employés et les résidents, entre les gestionnaires et les résidents. Il peut y avoir de l'abus au niveau des familles aussi. Et les gestionnaires, c'est des endroits qui sont très violents. Bref, qu'est-ce que ça veut dire de vivre dans une institution? C'est que tu perds ta citoyenneté. Tu deviens un objet de soins. Donc, un objet qu'on exploite, puis qu'on entrepose loin des regards. Maintenant, moi, comme je dis, ça fait longtemps que je me bats pour sortir de là. J'ai sondé, coopérative, j'ai monté un projet avec le gouvernement pour sortir d'ici, un projet pilote pour créer un programme d'assistance personnelle autodirigée qu'on appelle. Donc, ça permettrait à des personnes comme moi et d'autres de vivre dans la communauté, d'avoir le contrôle sur nos vies et d'être inclus dans la société. J'ai fait du lobbying auprès du gouvernement pendant 3 ans pour faire passer ce projet-là. Ils nous ont pas entendus, ils nous ont pas écoutés. Ce qu'ils nous proposaient, c'était plus d'institutions. Puis, nous, on a rejeté ça. Hein. Quand je dis nous, c'est pas juste moi. La coopérative qu'on a créée, on est environ une 50aine de personnes dans la même situation. Et on a regroupé tous ces gens-là pour justement avoir une portée plus grande. C'est des gens qui sont peut-être partout au Québec. Et on a décidé de se représenter, nous autres, dans nos gouvernements. Donc, on a atteint une impasse avec le gouvernement. Donc, on a décidé collectivement de passer à l'action. Donc, on est passé à l'action directe, non violente. Donc, moi, ce que j'ai fait avec le soutien de mes collègues, de mes camarades, c'est qu'on a érigé une cage en face du Parlement du Québec et je suis resté là 5 jours et 5 nuits. Et ça l'a fait tout un tollé dans les médias. Il y a eu beaucoup de couverture médiatique. J'ai donné une 50aine d'entrevues au Québec, au Canada aussi, en français, en anglais. Et ça a été à la une des médias pendant plusieurs jours. Et ce qui a rendu ça possible, c'est vraiment un effort collectif. Moi, j'ai travaillé fort pour réaliser ça, mais il y a beaucoup d'activistes qui m'ont soutenu là-dedans, qui m'ont aidé justement à ériger la cage avec tout ce que ça implique. Comme vous voyez, dans la cage, j'avais un lit d'hôpital, j'avais mon lit de personne, tout mon matériel que j'avais besoin. Et j'étais bien équipé pour rester là pendant un bon bout de temps. J'avais aussi des assistants qui se sont portés volontaires pour m'aider. Donc, ce qu'on a fait, on a négocié avec le gouvernement pendant 5 jours pour en arriver à une résolution parce que c'était un état de crise pour le gouvernement. Ils voulaient vraiment pas que je reste là encore longtemps. Il y avait peur pour ma vie aussi parce que je suis dépendant d'un respirateur artificiel. Donc, ça a pris toute une logistique au niveau des batteries. Il n'y avait pas de courant. Il a fallu que j'aille beaucoup d'aide pour que je tienne le coup. Donc, on a négocié pendant tout ce temps-là avec les représentants du gouvernement. Et il y a des personnes handicapées qui ont aussi participé. Hein. On a eu des gens des 4 coins du Québec qui sont descendus pour venir me voir. Et on s'est regroupés là pendant plusieurs jours. Il y en a plusieurs qui sont restés là à dormir avec moi, à passer les nuits avec moi. Donc aussi, il y avait des organismes communautaires qui nous ont appuyés de diverses façons au niveau de la logistique, des contacts avec les médias. On avait aussi des contacts politiques avec les différentes parties d'opposition. Donc, tout le monde a mis la main à la pâte là, pour en arriver à une résolution positive. Parce que la grande crainte du gouvernement, c'est justement que ça finisse en drame. Puis moi, j'étais absolument déterminé à rester là le plus longtemps possible. Et il était vraiment découragé là, à la fin de chaque journée quand je lui disais que j'allais rester une nuit de plus. Donc, on s'est représenté, puis on a fait du bruit durant toutes ces journées-là. Ça a été vraiment le fun de voir comment il y avait de l'enthousiasme dans la communauté des personnes handicapées, non seulement sur le terrain, mais en ligne aussi, sur Twitter, sur Facebook. Il y avait énormément de partages. Tout le monde a fait de leur mieux de faire connaître la cause. Ça l'a vraiment mis sur la map, hein, comme on pourrait dire, la situation, la condition des personnes handicapées. Hein, notre message était clair, on ne veut plus être ségrégé du reste de la population. On veut vivre dans la communauté, on veut être inclus comme tout le monde, on veut être des citoyens comme tout le monde. Donc, après 5 jours, on en est venu à une résolution avec le gouvernement. Ils ont décidé de mettre en place un groupe de travail pour faire avancer notre proposition d'un nouveau programme d'assistance personnelle autodirigé au Québec. On a eu des rencontres depuis à toutes les semaines depuis le mois d'août. Ça avance. Justement, dans les prochaines semaines, on devra avoir des nouvelles à partager sur les conclusions. Pour moi, ça a été une expérience vraiment extraordinaire de vivre justement en dehors des murs de l'institution pendant 5 jours, 5 nuits. J'avais vraiment l'impression d'être vivant puis de faire partie de la société. Donc, ça illustre très bien comment ça peut être positif là, de travailler ensemble, puis de tous pousser dans la même direction pour en atteindre nos objectifs. Mais il faut utiliser tous les moyens nécessaires, que ce soit au niveau politique, médiatique, administratif, action directe, non violente. On doit utiliser tous les outils qui sont à notre disposition. Donc, ça ici, c'est la députée du gouvernement, Mme Marilyn Picard, qui a été représentante du gouvernement. C'est avec elle qu'on travaille là, pour en arriver à un dénouement positif à cette situation-là. Moi, personnellement, je ne suis pas sorti du bois. Il reste encore beaucoup de travail à faire. Je travaille jour et nuit sur ce projet-là. Donc, c'est un peu ça, mon travail des derniers mois. Donc, merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for sharing that story with us and absolutely demonstrating the power of working together and what you've accomplished in these months. We celebrate your work and so glad that you can also be a part of these webinars that we're putting on and the work that we're doing to build momentum for the Canada Disability Benefit. Thank you very much, Jonathan. So like I was saying, this is the fourth webinar that we've put on. Many of you have been with us throughout that time and heard Peter talk about the ways that we as citizens and people with disabilities and families and communities can work together. We heard from Utah about the power of inclusive design and the importance of planning for folks on the margins and some very interesting ways of doing that. And last week we heard from Delise Sylvester about the way that all of us have influence, that we have people that we look to for influence and the way that we influence people. And today we're very happy to welcome Adam Kahane to be with us today. And Adam will talk about the power of working together. So Adam's going to present for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then he'll be joined by Donna Thompson and Rabia Kader to continue the discussion there. So Adam, thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Thanks for inviting me to this this series. It's a humbling experience for me to be here, and I didn't quite understand I'd be following Jonathan, who's a very famous person in Quebec, and it's an honor to be on the same screen as you. I admire very much what you did or are doing. I don't have a history in working in disability issues at all. I have a completely different or community organizing or grassroots work. I have a different kind of experience in collaboration that I'd like to share with you, and I hope it can be useful for what you're trying to do here. I know that it's a very important moment in Canada on these issues, and if what I'm saying can be useful at all, I'll be happy. So I'm gonna follow what Jonathan did and also show you some slides. I've been working together in a particular way for the past 30 years, a particular kind of collaboration amongst different kinds of people. So I think the best way for me to explain this is to give you an example. So I want to talk about some work that my colleagues and I have been doing over these last few years in Mexico, actually, and then give you, tell you something about what I've learned from 30 years of this kind of work. So this work in Mexico started in September 2014. I don't know how many of you remember, but there was a terrible incident of 42 student teachers murdered in Mexico in a place called Ayotzinapa, indigenous students, through some combination of criminals and the Mexican security forces. And there have been other massacres in Mexico, but this was particularly dramatic. And around the same time, there was a big scandal relating to the wife of the president having received a house from somebody who had a big government contract. And so what happened in late 2014 is there were huge demonstrations throughout Mexico, hundreds of thousands of people in Mexico City and elsewhere. And a group of Mexican citizens, I don't know what I'd say, a group like you, but anyhow, a group of people who were concerned about this situation decided to organize a project in early 2015. And the project's called Possible Mexicos. And what was distinctive about the project is they brought together people from across what they call the different Mexicos: indigenous people, journalists, human rights activists, politicians, people from the presidency, journalists, owners of companies, grassroots activists, trade unionists, people from the army and the police. And the task of this group was, what can we do together to tackle what they called the 3 I's: illegality, insecurity, and inequity. And I have about a dozen photographs of that team working together. We've been working with them over these 5 years, and I thought it would give you a bit of a flavor of at least what I mean by multi-stakeholder collaboration. This was the first moment of the first meeting. Of course, you don't know any of these people. They're a group of people that's not normally in the same circle in Mexico: household workers, union, business executives, et cetera, but maybe even though you don't know them, you can see a little bit their hesitancy about being in a circle here. And they started to work together for quite a few hours or days. They spoke about what's happening here, and they used Lego. There's reasons why it's interesting to not just talk to each other, but to actually try to make a model of what you're talking about in one way or another. And in this photograph, a transgender woman who works for the government is explaining how she sees the situation in Mexico, and the man sitting next to her is one of Mexico's wealthiest businessmen. And when I look at his face, I imagine that he's not used to hearing this perspective, and he's really trying to understand, why is she saying what she's saying? And this went on with people from the army and human rights activists and academics at different tables, and continued to try over the days that followed. This work went on for different workshops for some months to try to literally construct a picture of what is going on, what could go on, what should go on in Mexico. For me, it's significant that they're constructing something together, not just talking at each other, not just writing in their own notepads, but building something together, in this case, a story about what could happen in Mexico. And in addition to these pretty long and intense working sessions, having meals together and in the bar together and walking together or sitting together. In this case, a very prominent feminist talking with a Catholic bishop, which was a pretty difficult experience for both of them. And the reason I'm showing you these photographs is to show you a little bit how the relations between people changed as they did this interesting but serious and difficult work together, really trying to figure out, in this case, a peasant leader and a university professor, really trying to figure out what yeah, what did they think was happening and needed to happen? And people of different ethnicities and genders and ages. Here's a picture of an activist saying goodbye to a policeman, saying, "Last time I was in the room with a policeman, I was being tortured." So it was a pretty interesting series of meetings, went on for many months. This is the final circle of that group, and maybe you can see after some meetings together from their facial expressions and their body language how they're relating to each other in a different way than they were in the first picture at the beginning. And then a few months later, presenting their results on television, all seated on a stage together. Again, you don't know these people, but for a Mexican audience to see these people speaking with one voice in all their diversity and difference was quite a big deal. I'll just say one more word of, no, sorry, I'll come back to that later. So this is the example I wanted to give. This is the work that my colleagues and I do. We work all over the world, in Canada and the Americas and elsewhere in the world. Our specialty is not a particular subject. We work on all kinds of subjects, but it always has this theme of how can diverse actors work together, including people that don't agree with or like or trust each other. For me, one of the most interesting things about the Mexico group is they've been working together for 5 years. They're on a WhatsApp chat together, so I see their messages every day. And after 5 years, they actually don't agree any more than they did at the beginning, but they like each other, they trust each other, and they're able to do a lot of things together, whether it's on education or on rights for household workers or on legal reform or on things in the Congress. And this to me is the prize. The prize is not can we agree, but can we work together? In English, we say coexistence, but in Spanish, they say convivencia, living together. And it really has this connotation of a family or a couple living together with all of the, agreement and disagreements that involves. So anyhow, I've been doing this work, different parts of the world with different groups for the past 30 years. And here's the things I've learned, which I'm going to go through quickly. First of all, that collaboration is not the only option. It's very important to understand before you talk about collaboration, to realize that you've got other alternatives. Secondly, that it's never straightforward. So if you find it difficult or complicated, or that's because it is, that the conventional way people do it or think they have to do it actually doesn't work. That what does work is doing almost the opposite in 3 ways. And then I'll end by saying that, at least in my opinion, the essence of this work has to deal with very, very fundamental things about engaging love, power, and justice. So on the first point, if we're faced with a situation that we don't like to take Jonathan's example, the situation of disabled people in the province of Quebec, we have 4 ways we can deal with it. And these are they all have their place. One is forcing. I don't like the way things are. I'm going to use what power I have, whether that's the votes I have or the money I have or the guns I have or the charisma I have, to make things the way I want them to be, whether or not that's what other people want. Secondly is adapting. The situation's not the way I want it to be. I can't make it the way I want it to be. And so I'm going to try to get on with my life as best I can in a situation I can't change. And this is not at all unusual. Probably most of us adapt most of the day. It's snowy and cold outside my house in Quebec now. I don't have any choice about that. If I want to go out, I have to adapt to it, put on a warm coat. I can't change what's happening. The third option is I'm not happy with the way things are. I can't make them the way I want them to be. I can't live with it as it is, and so I quit. I either emigrate or quit my job or get a divorce or walk out of the institution, I guess would be the example Jonathan gave. So I'm exiting. And the fourth option is the option of collaborating. working with others, not just our friends and colleagues, but strangers and opponents, to try to change the way things are. And for some people, it's their favorite option. For some people, it's the last resort. But the key point for me is that it's not the only option. And if this is if what we're talking about in this webinar series is working together to change things, I think it's important to recognize that's not the only option. Anyhow, I work in collaboration. I write about collaboration. I'm talking to you about collaboration. And if you do a Google search on the word collaboration, you get two kinds of images. You get this quiet, safe, interesting, peaceful activity. And you also get an image like this. Two women in France, 1944, after the Second World War, accused of having collaborated with the Nazis and stripped of their clothes, their hair shorn, and paraded through the streets. So collaboration always has these two meanings in both English and French. It means to work together, and it means to betray. And it's never straightforward, because there's always this question: if I work with those people, am I going to end up being forced or betraying that which is most important to me? So the third point I want to make is, what does collaboration involve? How do you do it? This is one image of collaboration: group of people. They have a target to get to. They have a way to get there. Maybe it's complicated, but they see where they need to go. And so the recipe for collaboration would be the following. Number one, focus on the good of the whole, on what's best for the whole of the situation. Two, focus on agreeing what the problem is, agreeing what the solution is, agreeing what the plan is. And thirdly, focus on what people need to do to implement the plan. Now, I've been giving different versions of this talk all year, and I've been doing surveys, and I asked people, does this seem like a good recipe? And about 80% of people say, yes, this is a good recipe. And my answer is no, this in general is a very bad recipe. It doesn't work. And especially in situations that are out of control, where different people have different opinions and interests and needs. We can't control what other people do. And what's required instead is something I call stretch collaboration. And stretch collaboration is different from conventional collaboration in three ways. Firstly, in conventional collaboration, we say we focus on the good of the whole, the harmony of the team. We say, leave your personal agendas at the door. In stretch collaboration, we understand that that is always, always unrealistic and even illegitimate. People have different experiences, interests, opinions. And so the challenge is not how to get everybody to agree, but how to find a way to work with difference and similarity, recognizing that there isn't just one whole. When I say pay attention to the good of the whole, what I'm really saying is pay attention to what matters to me. And I think this is fundamental for all kinds of collaborative activities like the one that you're involved in. This is not straightforward at all, but it's important to understand that there's always multiple wholes, multiple parts that are large, wholes that are parts of larger wholes, whole-ons. Secondly, in conventional collaboration, we say first we need to agree on the problem, then on the solution, then on the plan. And maybe in some cases this is possible, but usually it's not, for two reasons. First of all, we're not going to get ready to agree on what we should be doing forever. We might get agreement on the next step. And secondly, we don't know what's going to work. We could be on this webinar for the next year trying to figure out what would work for a new regime or a new plan for the disability community in Canada. We might get some things right, but the way to figure out what works is to try it and see and adjust as we go, to experiment our way forward. And thirdly, and most fundamentally, in conventional collaboration, when people say, for the situation to change, people need to change what they're doing, what they really mean is other people need to change what they're doing. And in collaboration, we almost never can get anybody else to do anything at all. And so what really matters is the question, the only thing that matters is what am I going to do differently tomorrow? To recognize that if I don't see how I'm part of the problem, I can't be part of the solution except by force. Okay, the final thing I wanted to say is that I did a workshop 3 years ago in Colombia after the signing of the peace accords, and I saw this man in the workshop. I'd met him before. His name's Francisco de Rue. He's a Jesuit priest. He's a very famous peacemaker in Colombia. He did many courageous things, and he had just been appointed the head of the Truth Commission in Colombia. Actually, it's called the Commission for Truth, Reconciliation, and Non-Repetition. Very interesting title. And I was kind of surprised he came to our little workshop because he had just got this job. He said he was interested in methodology. Anyhow, we had a good meeting. He came up to me at the end of the day, he said, Adam, I see what you're doing. So I said, well, what am I doing? And he said, you're removing the obstacles to the expression of the mystery. So this is how I now understand what this work's about. It's what I'm writing a new book about that one sentence. What does it mean to remove the obstacles to the expression of the mystery? If you can't get people to do things, I think what this is really about is removing the obstacles to them doing so. And that means three things. It means unblocking power, which I define as the drive to self-realization. And I think, at least my outside perspective, is that a lot of the work of the disability movement is unblocking power, the drive of every person to live, to realize themselves, to be whole, to grow, to be human, without anybody kneeling on their neck or locking them up. Secondly, to unblock love, by which I mean the drive to reunification, to connection, to being part of something larger, which most people want. And thirdly, and this is the part that wasn't very clear in my own thinking, is to unblock justice, which has to be both, I think, the principle and the objective of all of this work. So I think the essence of the kind of collaboration I'm talking about is not about getting people to do things, but working together in a way that unblocks power, love, and justice. So I hope that's useful, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam. We're just going to bring Donna and Rabia into the screen now for a conversation. So, hi, Donna.
Hi. Hi, Adam. Thank you so much for a fantastic presentation. I have so many thoughts listening to this, and I'm very, very interested. It was particularly poignant and, well, or provocative, maybe is a better word, that Jonathan's presentation came right before yours, Adam. And one thing that I wanted to ask you is, it struck me when you were talking about the case in the case study in Mexico, that they, one of the first slides was of a demonstration, and Jonathan's civic action was a demonstration. What role do you think demonstrations have, and are they necessary to kickstarting a process of unblocking injustice?
Yes, I think they are. I guess you chose the word demonstration, and I mean, there's different meanings of the word. Marches in the streets and the kind of action that Jonathan and his comrades undertook, but also, I mean, when I saw his slides, when I saw Jonathan's slides, that's also a kind of demonstration. So I guess the way I would say it is, we can try to force things to be they want. We always have the option of trying to force, adapt, or exit. But if we're going to collaborate, and I repeat, it's not the only option, then people have to have a sense that, one, the situation is not good. I want to make it different. And secondly, I don't think I can make it different on my own. Those are the two preconditions. And usually those things don't happen spontaneously. Somebody just wakes up in the morning and says, gosh, I think things aren't good. I should do something about it. But it's demonstrated to them in some way. And the classic way, especially for the oppressed, is to demonstrate and to say, we're not going to put up with this anymore. And so, yes, I mean, I'm not saying it's the only way, but I think it's a big part of the story. Certainly it was in Mexico. Certainly it is in the, in the case Jonathan put forward.
You know, I think that maybe part of the challenge that we will need to put to ourselves to achieve what it is that we want to achieve here is thinking more about how to use art and social media in this role. I also was wondering, as you were speaking, Adam, I think all of us have really, really been thinking a lot during the pandemic about the value of lives of people with disabilities. And so speaking personally, I've been sort of alarmed, very alarmed at the level of ableism and ageism that we've seen in governments who are willing to sacrifice disabled lives for the sake of the economy. And so I wonder, again, going back to the Mexico example, you had a group of people where you identified, I can't remember what they are now, but the 3 I's in injustice, insecurity, and something else.
Inequity.
Inequity. So these were shared challenges. Everybody in that room of unusual collaborators experienced harm from these 3 elements that they want to tackle, right? So I guess what I'm wondering, what approach you should think that our movement should take, given that not everybody experiences the same inequities and injustices, and how can we imagine, to use another strategic word, imagine together the harms done to one are actually done to many? Or how can we come together with a shared, imagine a shared challenge that will be strong enough to motivate the population in this movement?
Yeah. So I won't try to give you advice because I don't believe in giving people advice and I don't have any, but I do want to say something about the Mexican case. No, people did not all experience these things differently. And in particular, the group included many members of the elite, and in Mexico, elites are really elite, who, of course, were concerned about the economy and their personal security, but in general, were doing very well. And so in a way, the biggest challenge in that group, and maybe for your movement as well, is how to help the people who are doing fine out of the current system realize that it's not all okay. I did one project like this many years ago in Canada, 20 years ago. And to make a long story short, it went nowhere because at a certain critical moment in the process, when it was where people were gonna have to do something differently, I remember very distinctly the comfortable members of the group saying, well, actually, we don't really have a problem. And the project just collapsed.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very fundamental issue, and I'm sure there must be 20 ways to deal with it, but I'll mention just one. And it's always interested me that in Mexico and these other processes, here's the most powerful thing the group has ever done, is the walk. It doesn't have to be walk. I mean, it can be sitting next to each other. I'm not trying to discriminate against people that aren't mobile, but the basic instruction is look around the room, find somebody you think is most different from you, and sit next to them or walk with them for the next half hour. And there's something about sitting next to somebody or walking where you're looking in the same direction. You're not on your phone. You don't have papers in front of you. That's the most powerful thing about it. And I think it's about seeing the other as a fellow human being. I've wondered for a long time, why is the walk the most popular thing in all of Rios's workshops? And I used to think it was this movement and not having a cell phone and looking in the same direction. But I think it's something more fundamental. A woman in Mexico said, no, Adam, you're missing the main point. She said, the main point is, this is the opposite of the Catholic confessional. She's a Catholic theologian. In the Catholic confessional, first you apologize, first you admit you are wrong, and then you'll be forgiven. She said the walk is the opposite. She had done the walk in the workshop. She said, first you're treated as a fellow human being, and then you can think about, do you want to think about things differently or do something differently? And I would say that 80% of the most powerful events I've experienced in 30 years arise from people seeing the other as a human. And so anyhow, I'm sure there's many ways to do this, but I think that's an important clue. And that's why the demonstration that Jonathan did and that Jonathan showed slides about, to me is a powerful example.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rabia. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. How are we going to do a walk?
Yes, I'm full of lots of thoughts and reflections, and I'm having some challenges focusing them. So I think, given our vast regional differences, given the fact that we are a federal, provincial, territorial sort of structure of governance and policy and offloading of programs and responsibilities, we kind of shift justice and equity and security matters all over the place. So given our history, our recent history of, ignore the problem by institutionalizing, and then, oh, wait a minute, we did things wrong. We're going to solve it by deinstitutionalizing. But we're not doing anything in between. We've left all kinds of unknown gaps, and we've also used our historical colonial strategy of divide and conquer by compartmentalizing disabilities into certain branches and labels and brands, and some are more attractive and sexier than others. And we have this perception of a hierarchy of disablement, quote unquote. How do we reconcile all of this, adding intersectionality, adding the vast diversities that we have, that transcend these regional differences and branches of responsibility and categorization, that add, gender and age and financial status and family and faith and race to the equation? Like, how do we bring it all together into a movement? We've talked about the power of a single story. Something I touched on last week after last week's session, that we need to find that single story, and we need to take that as our narrative and tell and retell it, that it's a shared common thread that binds every person living with a disability and or caring about someone with a disability in this country together to dream of a better future. So how do we do that walk, sit out, protest, demonstration, strike, whatever we want to call it? How do we do that given all these dynamics? So given the experiences that you're talking about, using Mexico as an example, and I hear that you have done all kinds of incredible work for decades around the world. So what can you share with us, Adam, given the complexities and dynamics that we're talking about?
Well, I don't know whether it's, I don't quite know what to say, except that these the differences and the fragmentation and the separation, the apartness. I started my work in South Africa. The word apartheid means apartness. So this feature of our world is experienced not just in the Canadian disability community, but everywhere. So, I mean, I'm trying neither to be encouraging or discouraging, but just to say that the issues that you're referring to are issues that everybody's trying to deal with in South Africa, in Mexico. Worked a lot with First Nations in Manitoba, in Thailand, in Ethiopia, in Haiti. And for me, I guess the one thing I'd say, which is maybe not obvious, is I'm not sure it's about the power of it. Well, there may be a value to a single story in terms of a communication campaign, but for me, the first stretch is that there's not going to be one right answer, one greater good, one whole, but there's going to be continued togetherness and continued separateness, and to recognize that and learn to work with it is the key thing. I worked a lot in Colombia, and in particular, I worked with a man named Juan Manuel Santos, who long after I worked with him became president, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2016. And I interviewed him a little while after he won the Nobel Peace Prize, and I asked him, why do you still remember the work we did in 1996, because he had referred to it in a speech. And he gave a very interesting answer. He said, the reason I keep remembering that work and keep referring to it is that that's where I realized that contrary to all of my political and cultural upbringing, it is possible to work with people you do not agree with and will never agree with. And I thought this was such an interesting idea, because often we have this idea, well, we'll meet, we'll go for a walk, we'll get to know each other, and we'll find, it was all a terrible misunderstanding, and actually we agree. Well, maybe we will, maybe we won't. But to me, that's not the important point. The real question, or not the question, but how can we find a way of living together, convivencia? How can we find a way of living together in spite of our differences? I just think that's a more promising avenue. And that's why I mentioned what I said about the Mexicans. After 5 years, they still disagree about it. Almost the same things. They still have flame wars on the WhatsApp, but they like and trust each other, and they're able to do a lot of things together. And as far as I'm concerned, that's as good as it gets. So I guess the I don't know if it's advice, but what I'm trying to say gently is don't make agreeing a condition for moving forward. That's what I'm saying.
So then my question is, how do we move forward without consensus or agreement? Like the desire to move forward is a common goal, but how do we actually do it if we do not agree?
Well, we might agree on some things, and we might agree on a few things and disagree on others. We might act separately, but more or less in the same direction. There's some things we do together, some things we do separately. But the idea that we're not doing anything until we all agree, to me, is too high a bar. Mm-hmm. I was once at a meeting in Colombia where in the middle of the day, somebody said, we all have to agree on X. I don't remember what X was, but some ideological point. And I said the kind of thing a facilitator should never say. You only do it when you're really desperate. I said, trust the process, which in general, I don't recommend saying. That's kind of a stupid thing to say. But anyhow, what really interested me at the end of the day is that group never agreed on the particular point that politician wanted to make. But they nonetheless agreed on 10 things they were going to do, sometimes together, sometimes separately. Anyhow, they knew what each other was doing. And I thought that was so interesting so what I'm trying to say is, it is possible to move forward even without us all agreeing on anything. And that is a very liberating realization. And maybe as we work together, we'll find, oh, that thing that we thought was such a big issue actually isn't an issue. And this thing we weren't paying attention to, now that's a real thing we have to focus on. So the idea that we can't do anything until we agree, for me, is the primary impediment to making progress. I'll just say one last thing about this, because I know that part of what you're working on has to do with legislation or a plan. And so, in that domain, there's going to be one text, not 10. But somebody once said to me in Colombia, they said, it's not an accident. It's not an accident that when we take a vote in the Congress, people don't say why they're voting for something. And the fact, he said, the strongest agreements are ones that different people support for different reasons. So all of this is just different ways of saying that we have to acknowledge and work with the difference, maybe permanent differences, and find our way forward without insisting we all agree on the same reasons for the same things and doing the same thing together. That's what I've learned, for what it's worth.
I think my key takeaway from what you're saying, reading between the lines, is it's really important to have a facilitator who understands that and doesn't drive us to finding that agreement.
Well,
That's my takeaway.
Can I just ask one small question too before we end this session? I'm not sure how much more time we have left, but Adam, you've described your process and a lot of the ideas behind this way of working to achieve some action. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about, is it best to start with a small group of sort of unusual suspects and enemies, friends, allies, whomever, a diverse group, and then build out? Or does size matter in this process?
I've always been amused when ASL facilitators, interpreters does size matter? Seen it before, seeing it again. So first of all, the kind of work I've been doing is a very particular kind of work. There's many ways of doing this: mass things, social media things, marches, campaigns, etc. My experience is with a very specific approach of working with 40 or 50 people. But the answer I'll give you is from the first experience I had, which was in South Africa in 1991, during the transition from apartheid to democracy. You could call it from apartness to a democratic way forward together. And the people who organized that, which wasn't me, I was the facilitator, other people organized it, brought in the broadest group they could. They didn't get everybody. There were a few groups, I won't bore you with the details, that they couldn't get, but they got a pretty broad group. Black, white, men, women, opposition, establishment, left, right, business, politician, community, trade unions, etc. And they did something that was quite influential in South Africa at the time, particularly around the economic policy of the Mandela government. And one of the members of that team said to me afterwards, he said, what we did is we sketched out the way forward for those of us who wanted to find a way forward. And I thought it was an interesting formula. He was saying not everybody joined us. Some people wanted to keep things the way they were, but his point was, I guess, we had enough of the people we needed to push things forward, and we agreed on enough of it so that we could move forward. And it was a contribution, not the decisive thing, but a contribution to moving forward together. And in spite of all the many difficulties South Africa's had since then, they did manage to make a huge epochal. So I guess what I'm saying, at least with the way I work, or with the way Rios works, is, yeah, to find the people who, I'll say it this way, find the people who believe the current situation is problematic. And what I'm saying it with that funny phrasing, the problematic situation, because these things are never as simple, or not usually as simple, as a problem that has a solution. If they're problematic situations that different people understand to be problematic from different perspectives and for different reasons. Some people may see as a human rights issue, other an inclusion issue, other a health issue, other an economic issue, other a family issue, other a moral issue. We don't all have to agree on what the problem is. We have to agree the situation is problematic or has the potential to be problematic, that we can't sort it out sitting separately. So let's see what we can do together, period.
Fantastic. That's our roadmap.
Thank
That's
you.
our challenge.
Yes, thank you, Rabia and Donna and Adam. Feels like a conversation that we could have for hours, and I just really appreciate the chance to think this through with everyone. We're going to take a little music break. Donna, you talked about the importance of music and art and culture, and we have Mary Helene with us today, who's going to be talking about a really incredible dance group that she leads and she's part of. So Mary Helene will come. We'll have a short video if you want to get up and stretch your legs. Then we'll hear from Erin and Liz and Zoe as well. So Mary Helene, thank you for being here, and I'll just turn it over to you to introduce yourself and your video, and then Tom will play that. So hello.
OK, thank you. Donc, ça me fait plaisir d'être avec vous aujourd'hui pour une petite pause dans votre longue journée. Donc, mon nom, c'est Marie-Hélène Bellavance. Je suis une artiste multidisciplinaire depuis plusieurs années maintenant. Ma pratique est principalement en art visuel, mais depuis 2005, je travaille avec la compagnie Corpuscule Danse, qui est une compagnie basée et fondée à Montréal, une compagnie de danse intégrée. Donc, la danse intégrée, c'est une rencontre entre des danseurs professionnels qui sont issus de la diversité fonctionnelle, qui ont un handicap, et des danseurs professionnels sans handicap. Donc, la compagnie a été fondée en 2000 par France Geoffroy, qui est quadraplégique, qui avait un désir de danser depuis longtemps, puis il n'y avait pas vraiment d'opportunité au Québec de danse pour les personnes à mobilité réduite. Donc, elle a décidé de prendre un peu le modèle qu'il y a sur des compagnies en Angleterre, en Europe, comme par exemple Kanduko, ou aux États-Unis, Axis Dance Company, qui sont des compagnies de danse intégrées aussi. Puis elle a fondé sa compagnie de danse. Pour ma part, j'ai une amputation des 2 pieds. Donc, quand j'ai approché France, c'était par désir de découvrir un peu la danse sans penser que c'était un domaine dans lequel je pouvais me développer comme artiste. Puis finalement, de projet en projet, la danse est vraiment entrée dans ma vie de plus en plus. Puis maintenant, au sein de la compagnie, j'accompagne France à la co-direction artistique. Donc, juste pour vous faire un petit portrait rapide avant de vous montrer des images, la compagnie danse œuvre différents volets. Donc, on a un volet de danse professionnelle. On fait des projets de création avec des chorégraphes d'ici et d'ailleurs, puis on les présente dans des salles de spectacle. On a aussi un volet enseignement, où est-ce que c'est très important pour nous, la transmission de nos connaissances aussi. Puis, donc, on enseigne à un groupe d'enfants, d'ados, d'adolescents, d'adultes, dans un contexte où est-ce qu'il y a vraiment... c'est pas de la danse adaptée, c'est vraiment une rencontre avec des enfants qui ont un handicap et des enfants sans handicap aussi. Donc, c'est toujours dans le but de créer cette rencontre-là, puis faire évidemment tomber les tabous, tomber les appréhensions, puis on a aussi des projets avec la communauté de médiation culturelle, donc qui impliquent différents groupes avec des maisons de la culture ou autour d'un projet artistique qui sont vraiment des projets de création, mais plus créés pour la communauté. Donc, ça ressemble un peu à ça, les activités qu'on fait. J'aimerais peut-être vous laisser sur le vidéo, puis revenir après si... Je ne sais pas s'il y a des questions ou si on fait juste présenter, puis vous laisser sur ça, mais le vidéo va pouvoir vous mettre en lumière un peu mieux, en images, qu'est-ce qu'on fait, qu'est-ce qu'on crée. C'est une présentation un peu de la compagnie, puis je dirais que l'idée aussi est de comment je pourrais dire? Dans notre mission, il y a aussi ce désir de montrer aux gens, d'ouvrir sur... des fois, on part avec le désir d'une seule personne, comme là, c'était le désir de France Geoffroy, de créer quelque chose. C'était son désir à elle était de danser, puis elle s'est alignée avec cette direction-là. Puis, juste parce qu'elle était honnête avec ce désir-là, ça crée un rayonnement qui est beau pour moi, de pouvoir comme être intègre avec, avec notre essence, puis aller dans cette direction-là. Puis après, le rayonnement que ça crée autour, les gens peuvent aussi aller chercher cette envie-là ou ce désir-là de rayonner. Donc, en tout cas, je m'exprime mal pour la dernière partie, mais je vous laisse avec la vidéo, puis on verra s'il y a de la place pour parler après. Merci.
The prompts is going to be right here. Okay? Okay.
back up. Hi, friends. Bonjour. It's been such an amazing thing to be here for these sessions, and this last session in particular. Liz and I usually do co-graphic recording, and so we're both together at the front of the room working on the same paper. And I'll often look over and she'll have drawn something that changes my perception of the whole event. And I'm kind of thinking of a couple of stories. And one of those is that we were working with this large group of social workers. And so our job as graphic reporters is not to editorialize, but to report. But I'm also a researcher, so I was getting quite frustrated with all the social workers and all what I perceived to be their excuses for what they weren't doing. And then I looked over, and Liz had drawn a person on a unicycle juggling plates and surrounded by hearts and flowers. And I was so moved by her perception. And when I looked back at the room, I could see how hard those people were trying to do a good job, right? Which I hadn't been able to see all morning. So that was one story that came up as I was listening. And the other one is we lost one of our dear friends, Jerry, about a year ago. And he was part of a group of people looking at leadership through an arts-based lens. And we were all having so much fun together. And he was a well-known self-advocate, represented in many places. And I was supporting him one day, and we were having these conversations that didn't seem to be going anywhere. And at the break, I went over and I said, "Are you okay? These are really frustrating conversations." And he said, "Oh, Aaron, you know, the conversations have just started." And I was like, "No, it's over at 2 o'clock." And then we were in a hotel, and I went down to the bar later on, and he got one of the people who was really important in government, and they were having a drink together, and Gary was telling him his stories. And the next day, that guy came back to the table and said, "I heard a story from Jerry last night that changed everything for me." So I love that Adam is bringing us new ways to talk to each other. And this idea of stretch collaboration, I feel like I want to take the recording of this and sit down with 20 friends and do some stuff. I was particularly moved by Jonathan and Christine, who have these stories that then link up with Adam's story. And I've been to a few presentations of Adam's, and I'm always blown away. And I have to tell you, this is like one of the first times I've been intimidated by graphic recording. So just bringing those stories together in tandem with this idea of how to talk to each other, when for folks with disabilities, often they're perceived to have no voice or no ability. I was also really taken by this idea of collaborating as having these two definitions, and I feel like that's put a jigsaw puzzle piece in for me. And then to bring Donna and Rabia together into these conversations, and you know, the whole idea of walking with difference. I feel like I have so much to think about. Liz, you've done a beautiful drawing.
So I wrote someone told me said imagine. I thought, oh, that's one of my favorite all-time songs. So I found the lyrics and I wrote that down. And then the word disability, some things together. Terry Fox, a guy in a wheelchair holding up one of those signs like protesting. Then we were talking about finding an easy way out, walking out. So I did that. I did some flags, people together. The hands, I resemble the diversity. So I thought I'd be interesting at that.
I can hold this close
if you can see it.
Was sent me a photo of this a few minutes ago, and I was thinking, there she is again, picking up things I missed. So it's always a delight to work with her. I think we'll be cleaning these up and giving them the plan, and they will come to you. So people will get copies of the graphics.
so much, Liz and Aaron, and we're excited to be able to send out the images of your amazing drawings later after the webinar is done. And I just want to say thank you for all of you for being here. In just a while, we're going to move to breakout rooms to give you a chance to speak with each other, reflect on what you've heard, the stories from Jonathan, the conversation with Rabia and Donna and Adam, and some of the concepts that Adam has talked to us about. Before that, though, we're really pleased to have Zoe Alvarum with us. And Zoe's going to introduce herself and tell you a little bit about her life and some of her story and respond to what she's heard so far. So Zoe, thank you so much for being here. It's really great to have you. And I just invite you now to share with the group some of your story and your ideas.
Hi, everyone. I don't have a presentation, but I'm just going to speak to you from my experience. I hope I can contribute something that's not really on the table, and maybe you can take something away. So hi, my name is Zoe Alvarum. I am a 17-year-old with achondroplasia dwarfism from Pond Inlet, Nunavut. Now, I'm not going to tell you about my disability specifically, rather my home. If you don't know where Nunavut is, it's at the top of Canada where all those little islands are. Since I only have about 10 minutes after this, I encourage you to learn more about my amazing territory. Now, there are so many different aspects about Nunavut I could tell you about today. But I wanted to tell you about what it is to live here with my having a disability, specifically around COVID-19. As we all know, COVID-19 has showed us where the cracks are in the system. Nunavut is an isolated territory, only accessible by air. So lucky enough, we were able to keep COVID-19 out for 8 months. But unfortunately, we had our first confirmed case here on November 6th. And since then, we've had a total of 153 cases. Now, I know this might not seem like a lot to you, but keep in mind, we only have a population of 30,000 people. Also, many live in overcrowded housing, and the healthcare is not at its best. Not only that, at the only hospital in our territory, there are only 35 beds, 35 beds, and 12 ventilators. I will let that sink in. 35 beds, 12 ventilators, 30,000 people competing for those beds. If those fill up, people from Nunavut will be flown down to the nearest hospitals in southern Canada, either Edmonton, Winnipeg, Ottawa, or Montreal, where they will be competing with your citizens for those beds and those ventilators. There are already so many inequalities in the whole system across Canada, just as Jonathan had said. I am not going to connect the dots for you for what it's like with people with disabilities, such as myself in Nunavut. But I will leave you with this thought. How are we, the disabled community, supposed to get proper care when we are competing with 30,000 others for those beds and those ventilators on a first come, first serve basis? We talk about, getting people together, and kind of what this talk is about is, coming together for a greater cause. Nunavut has been left out a lot with everything. We are the last territory to have, joined Canada. And not many Canadians know where we are even. Living with a disability in Nunavut, though, is one of the greatest things that could have ever happened to me. I live in a community that is supportive, that doesn't see me to have a disability, where I'm, just one of the community. But there are massive cracks in the system where the risk is if I get COVID-19 in a community of 1,500 other people, there will be little hope for me to get the proper care, because the nearest major hospital is 3,000 kilometers away. And I'm obviously not the only person with a disability living in Nunavut. But we, like I said, are competing with 30,000 other people. And the Nunavut government said that those beds and those ventilators will go to the most in need. And that might not be the disabled community. And, I kind of don't know how to end this, but I'll kind of leave it up to you to think, because, I don't know how to end this. Just there are 30,000 people, 12 ventilators, and the Nunavut government has basically said that there will be no priority for people like me with disabilities. It will go to the most sick. And so I'll kind of leave it there for.
Thanks, Zoe, for sharing that. Are people talking about it? Is it in conversations that you're having with others in your school, or are you seeing things in the media about people with disabilities and the triage protocols?
Nunavut has a lot of outstanding issues, as I kind of mentioned. There's overcrowded housing, little support to healthcare. And we also have a very small disabled community. I am only one of 5 people in my territory who has dwarfism alone. So there isn't really a big group of us that can kind of bring this issue up with our government. And so we're just kind of going along with everything, and we hope for the best, because that's all we can do.
Well, you clearly know a lot about what we've been talking about in the webinar today, about the power of working together with other people, and the fact that we've connected and now working on it on a national priority like the Canada Disability Benefit. We're so pleased to get to know you and your insight and your advocacy skills that seem to come so naturally to you. So thank you very much for being here.
And I think that's another thing that we've learned during this pandemic is, Nunavut and the people of Nunavut are very community oriented. So no one does anything as an individual. It's all, we work as a collective and we do it together. And, it's been very interesting for us as Nunavut Miut to watch Southern Canada and see how other provinces and territories are reacting, because right now everyone is kind of acting as, Ontario, Alberta, Quebec, Manitoba, everyone is acting as, kind of caring for themselves. And there isn't that collective, let's work as Canada to solve this issue. And Nunavut, it's in the Inuit culture growing up here that you don't poke the bear, so to say. You only speak when you're called on. You don't, raise your voice. And so I think the issues that Nunavut is facing hasn't been brought up a lot compared to, our premier is very quiet. He doesn't, compared to other ones who are like, we need this, we need Trudeau, we need this, we need that. Our premier doesn't do that. And I think that shows a lot too about, you know, we need to work as a collective instead of individuals.
Mhm. Well, I can't wait to learn more from you and more about Nunavut. So thank you very much for being here. Now I think after hearing all of these stories, and you've given us so much to think about, we want to create an opportunity for you to speak to each other and share some of your own stories and your reflections on what we've heard about today, about the power of working together. So in just a moment, using Zoom, we're going to move into breakout rooms, and we don't have a specific question to offer you. I think the most important thing at this point is we've had so many ideas today and through the other sessions. Share with the others in your group what you've learned, or what's something new that has come out, and what you want to do with that. What is calling you to action next, and what your I guess what I'm trying to say is what's really in your heart and motivating you to move forward in this movement. So a couple of tech pieces regarding the breakout rooms. I'll move you into breakout rooms. The captioners and the signers will stay in the main room. So if you're someone who uses those services, please don't click the button that says breakout room. Stay in the main room, and we will carry on a conversation here with that. So let's take about 10 or 15 minutes together in small groups, and then we'll come back. We'll hear again from Rabia and talk about what's next. As our time is coming to an end, Rabia, we do want to hear some closing thoughts from you as well, and thinking back to the beginning of our session together, session 1, 2, 3, and then today 4. Want to turn it over to you for some closing thoughts, and then I have some thank yous and some announcements to make. So go ahead, Rabia.
Okay, thank you very much. Wow, we've been having this conversation every Thursday afternoon now for 4 weeks. This is tremendous. We've learned quite a lot in this journey from various perspectives, from people who have experience, expertise, and skills. And we still continue to engage in the hundreds in terms of people coming together and expressing interest. And I'm sure people are going back and having similar conversations. I've never had the privilege and honor of participating in such a dialogue with so many people from across the country, with so many varying perspectives. So it's really rich and has enriched my ideas and thoughts and commitment to want to do something. I think when we talk about a single story, or when I put out the notion of a single story and the power of that single story, to me, that single story is basic. It is interwoven with all our differences and all our complexities and all those things that make us and our lived experience unique as individuals with disabilities and families living with disabilities. That common thread that binds us into this single story that we want to leverage into power in order to seek justice is that story of oppression, that story of barriers, that story of being left behind. There are many ways to express ourselves. There are many principles that we can commit to that then bring some form of capacity to work together. What is important for me from today is the fact that, yes, we are not going to agree, but what we're going to agree to is to get to the finish line of justice. improving quality of life for every person with a disability in this country, regardless of our differences. May those be of race, ability, age, experience, preferences, family, lifestyle, choices, employment, education, what have you. But that experience of living with a disability, the fact that oppression is real, and that we all have a desire to seek justice for ourselves and our loved ones in order to improve quality of life. As someone said in this journey, 22% of us in Canada have disabilities. And if we touch the lives of another 40% of people living with disabilities are over 60% in families, in households, in relationships. So the lives of people with disabilities touch 60% of the population in different ways. We have to adopt the majority syndrome. We have to feel the power and leverage that power to come together, define the finish line, and remove the barriers we experience to improve quality of life and combat oppression. I really appreciated the fact today that there are so many differences and that there are so many right answers. Actually, you know, in this journey, I've taken some risks in expressing my faith in different ways. And there is a quote that often comes to mind, which is that my opinion may be correct but erroneous. And another opinion may be erroneous and yet correct. So there are a range of opinions and none of them are wrong. There are a number of goals we're going to have, and not all of them are going to apply to each and every one of us. There are going to be many ways of knowing and doing things that we are going to aspire to. But we are going to, in the midst of all of that chaos, we are going to find some common ground to move toward this path that combats oppression and seeks justice to improve quality of life of every person with a disability. So Rebecca, that's my reflection today.
Thank you so much, Rabia, for that reflection and for leading us all the way through. I can almost hard to believe that it's been 4 weeks on Thursdays that we've been meeting together, and I know for myself, I've really enjoyed the opportunity to get to know so many of you, both in these conversations and conversations that we've had offline in between the sessions. So I want to say thank you for being here and for participating in the building momentum for the Canada Disabilities Benefit webinars. And many of you have asked, what's next? When is the next webinar? Can we get together again? And we're happy to say that the answer for that is yes. Starting in December, we'll be having monthly webinars similar to this, hopefully with a lot more music and art and dance. Also, some panel discussions like what we heard today with Adam and Donna and Rabia. We're also interested in hearing your ideas about ways to connect. There's been some small group conversations that have been happening in between the sessions, and we want to continue this work that we're doing to unify and to coordinate our efforts as we continue to like you said, Rabia, improve the lives of people with disabilities. So thank you to each of you. And so many people and organizations have worked together to put this series on, and I just want to take a moment to thank some of those. So a very special thank you to the Saputo Foundation for the very generous financial support that you've provided. It's been great to get to know you and to work together with you. So thank you to the Saputo Foundation. Also to Stephanie and Tom and Caitlin from Plan Institute, your behind the scenes leadership in promotion and registration and tech has been so helpful to this process. So thank you to Plan Institute. I also want to thank Al Advansky, Bill Adair, and Jillian Davies for your vision for this series and for your support in planning and all of the ways that we can make these webinars as meaningful as possible. Also to all of the signers and interpreters and captioners who worked so closely with us to make these webinars available in so many formats and language. We really appreciate your work and the fun that we've had along the way. So thank you for making these some of the most accessible webinars that I've ever been on. I also want to again thank all of you for your ideas and ways that you've helped us to improve the sessions as we go along. And last but not least, I want to say a big thank you to Rabia Kader and Jonathan Marchand, our two co-hosts. You've set the tone for these webinars. You've taught us how critical it is to work together. You've generously shared your stories and most importantly, called us to action. So on behalf of all of the organizations and all of the presenters, I want to say a big thank you, and we look forward to the continued correspondence and conversations and gathering together again in December for our next live session together. So thanks so much, everyone.